Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday edition of the HockeyDebates.com podcast. I'm Bob Duff, joined by my fellow co-host and hockey debater, the esteemed Hall of Fame writer from USA Today, Kevin Allen. And today our special guest is author Aubrey Ferguson, and we're going to talk about Beehive photos today. And Aubrey's book, The Golden Years, looks back at what I think are historic times in hockey when the Beehive photos were out. Now, Canadians of a certain ilk are well familiar with the Beehive photos. Kevin, being an American, when I said we were going to talk about beehives today, he said, "Why are we talking about hairdos?" This is maybe for those who aren't familiar with beehives, Aubrey, give us kind of the Coles Notes version of what the Beehive photos were.
Okay, well, a picture's worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to start. If I can get on camera. This is a beehive. And it was a 5x8 black and white picture. It was put out from 1934 to 1968 by the St. Lawrence Starch Company of Port Credit, Ontario. And it was started in 1934 as a compliment to their sponsoring a sports broadcast. And they wanted to know if anyone was listening to McKnight on a sports broadcast. So they suggested that people send in a label from the can, and that St. Lawrence Starch would send them a picture. So they started with 10 players, 4 from Toronto and 6 from Montreal, 3 from the Canadiens, 3 from the Maroons. And they suddenly realized that they had really hit on something tremendous. At that time, they were number 2 in the market, 1934, and Crown Brand was the market leader and had been since the turn of the century. And within 5 years, they were the market leader. They stayed that way until they shut down in the early 1990s. And a lot of it goes back to the fact that they ran this promotion, and they ran it for 35 years, even during the war, except for 2 years when they had to shut down because the government wouldn't give them paper. Those were the only 2 years that they didn't run the promotion. So it was an amazingly successful story for them as a business. And for us as Canadians, as hockey fans, it was a way that we could get a sense of what Foster Hewitt was really talking about, because he painted these beautiful pictures on the radio for our ears, but it was our eyes that saw the beehives. The two went together really well.
Yeah, Aubrey, thanks for appearing on the show. I'm really actually quite interested in all this, and I've done several. When Gordie was alive, Gordie Howe, I did several interviews with him about beehives. As you know, he was a collector in his younger days, and he was fascinated by all that. Do you have a sense of how widespread collecting of this was when, particularly in the early years of this? I mean, is this something that every male did, or was it limited?
No, it was very pervasive. In fact, I wouldn't limit it to males. Young girls, school-age girls, were collectors. Even back in the 1960s, when I started collecting, there were girls in my class that were as fervent collectors as the guys. So, yeah, I would say that there wasn't a household in Canada that didn't buy Beehive corn syrup for the hockey pictures. And then moms had to come up with recipes to use the darn stuff.
How extensive is your collection?
Well, there's 1,025 pictures, unique pictures, and I've got them all but 10.
Wow.
And I would guess that I might get 5 of them in my lifetime. I haven't got anything in the last 5 years, so it's just a matter of luck. I picked up one the other day as a replacement, and I picked it up for $17. It wasn't expensive on eBay, but you can go for a long time before you pick up something you need. So, and then beyond the pictures themselves, there are things like the booklets just before the war. Here with the cameras, they put out the first Who's, like the Jim Hendy's books. They did that for 5 years. They did jewelry after the Second World War, which are really tough to turn up. That was quite popular, but expensive for them to mail, so they didn't stay in that very long. very popular promotion. It's hard for someone today who has, access to the internet and television to understand what it was like to be a farm boy in Kimberley, Ontario. We didn't have television. This is 1960. My only access to the NHL was Foster Hewitt on Saturday night and the Star Weekly on Saturday morning. And other than that, we didn't have a sense of what the NHL looked like or sounded like.
Well, as a young Canadian boy in the 1960s, I can vouch for how huge a part of my life beehives were. I still love pancakes, and I think that's why, because you had to get the labels off the beehive corn syrup. You had to have so many labels to send in to get an envelope of these photos of the NHL players. And, we had to eat that corn syrup as fast as we could to get our parents to buy more labels so we could get more photos. So we would devour pancakes for breakfast every chance we got. And, you'd sit in anticipation when the mail came in. And they always came in these unmarked vanilla envelopes that were very unimpressive. But when you saw that manila envelope, because it was the same size as the photos,
yeah,
you knew it was a good day, and there was always like 20, 25 of them in the package. So it was exciting. It was like, when you open your pack of hockey cards, it was the same idea. It was just so exciting.
That was the other thing that really set Beehive apart from chewing gum cards, is that you, the collector, could decide which players you wanted. So, you started with your favorites, your favorite players, your favorite teams. Maybe it was goalies you liked. You'd collect all the goalies. But you decided what you wanted, whereas with bubblegum, it was like a lottery. You didn't know what you were going to get. And that was one of the appeals of Beehive, is that it was custom made by the collector. And it also is one of the interesting things about Beehives is that the famous players, the Eddie Shores of the world, the Gordie Howes, the Bobby Hulls, there's demand for them only because they're stars, but they're not nearly as valuable as let's say somebody that came up with the Brooklyn Americans like Joe Kroll and played half a season. And most people say, well, who is Joe Kroll? But that's what made him rare. He was there when they took the pictures for the team. He played enough games that the ad agency for the Sonoran Starch Company decided that he was going to be around, and they would put his name on the list. It would be issued at the end of November, and kids would start ordering the picture. But if they didn't know who Joe Kroll was, let's say, they didn't order it, and then he became rare.
So, Aubrey, explain how it worked. Would you just order kind of off a menu of which players you wanted?
Yeah. First of all, we talked about labels, but by the 60s, the canister had a collar. And if the collar was torn, they wouldn't redeem it, because that meant you'd torn it in the store and hadn't bought the product. So you had to have an undamaged label or collar. And then when you ordered a picture, this was something they were very clever in doing. They would send you a checklist, or a player list, as they called it. And these were all the pictures that were available. So you would keep this, and you would check off which one you wanted. You would order it. And all it cost at that point was to send in that collar, and no money, mail it. And a week later, you got mail back. But if you were like Bob and you waited a while, you got a whole bunch of it. I was never that patient. I was always getting onesies and twosies. But this list was the godsend, and it's also a very big collectible as well. We have a list in our book of a picture of every list that was issued from the very beginning through the war years when they were actually typed by the women that worked at Beehive up to the very end. And the appearance changed slightly over the years, but much like the Beehive pictures, the management did not change what was working, and they just kept doing the same thing year after year after year.
Did you, Aubrey, so would there be, if it started in Gordie's rookie year, would there be 22 different Gordie Howes, one for each season, or was it? No.
No, that was the thing, is they did one picture of Gordie Howe, and that picture would stay unchanged until something happened. He changed teams, or in Gordie's case, he became captain. So his first picture was in 48. The next picture that was released of him was about 59, after he'd already been captain. And then the next one was a wood grain image of them that was put out. So for the most part, they didn't change. And you have guys like Milt Schmidt that had their rookie picture that was in the late pre-war years, so late 1930s. That picture of Milt Schmidt was the only picture you could get of him up till 1954 when he retired. So they weren't very aggressive marketers. These guys were corn syrup manufacturers, and they just ran the promotion. They let the ad agency decide who was going to be available, and they didn't have a different set every year. It was for the people that worked there. It wasn't a big deal. It was just something they did to sell corn syrup.
Why did they stop?
Excellent question. They stopped for a number of reasons. One was that corn syrup was not as popular. If you go back to the 30s when it took off, there was no such thing as pre-sweetened cereal. So people used corn syrup with their cereal. They used it as a baking ingredient. They used it as a dessert. By the 1950s, following the war, there was pre-sweetened cereal, and people weren't baking as much. They were going to the grocery store and buying their desserts. And so the consumption fell off. So the promotion wasn't driving the sales the way it used to. But one of the pivotal things was Ballard and Smythe buying the Toronto Maple Leafs. Up to the time that that Beehive was interacting with the Maple Leafs, they were paying the same price every year for the pictures. I think it was $3,400 a year. And they paid that every year for a license, and they could command the players to come on for an interview with Westman Knight on his Sports View program. They could use the picture, they could use the signature, they could get them to appear for signings or whatever. And when Ballard and Smythe and Bassett took over, they realized that they were cash strapped and they needed to make money in different ways than Connie Smythe had done. So they one of the things they did is they went after all of the companies, like the chewing gum companies and Quaker and St. Lawrence Starch, etc., to up the ante. So for the first few years, Beehive, St. Lawrence Starch, played the game. And one of the things they did was they reduced their costs. I have a picture here of the wood grain pictures that they put out. And the earlier pictures were two-piece. They were printed and they were die cut, and then they were glued to a backer card. But with these ones that come out in wood grain, these were cost savings because they were printed and there was no die cutting and there was no gluing. So they were doing everything they could to reduce costs because Ballard was putting the squeeze on them. Then in 64, the Players Association started to ask for money, and the St. Lawrence Starch management realized that the cost was going up yet again. And then by 67, the cost of postage had gone up to, I think, 5 cents a stamp from 1 cent originally. So all these things were adding up costs. And of course, it was costing more for staff to run the promotion. And the pivotal thing was expansion in 1967. And, there was a feeling that interest had declined in hockey. They certainly couldn't have pictures of all 12 players or all 12 teams and pay the premiums to 12 teams. So they just gave it up. So there was a number of factors, but it was all cost driven.
So there's always been kind of a mystery about the Beehive. There's always these elusive, were they or weren't they actually on a Beehive? There was a lot of, can you kind of solve that mystery for us? There's 1,025 photos. Have you determined about all these alleged beehives, if they actually exist or they're just a figment of collectors' imaginations?
Well, there are 1,025 real beehives that were put up by the St. Lawrence Starch Company. We know that. We have the pictures ourselves. We have them on the checklists, or we have envelopes with their names on them. So we know they were issued. But there's over another 700 that were faked. And these were pictures that 4 collectors had, 3 collectors and a photographer. They had the pictures, and they reproduced them. In fact, they did an amazing job. Some of the pictures are actually better than the Beehive pictures because they had a a lot of publicity shots, and they reproduced them as beehives, and they put them out, and they put them out discreetly. And they would go to a sports card show, and they say, "Oh, I've got a rare picture of Norm Defilus with Boston. You know, he played 6 games with Boston, and we have his beehive, and very few people have it, and we won $150 for it when other people were paying $5 and $10 for a beehive." So they made good money on it, and but they must have made a huge investment to put out over 700 pictures. And there are some of these pictures, and I use Defilus because he's one that a lot of people contest. They claim that the Defilus is real. The first picture that was issued of Don Simmons was actually of Norm Defilus with Don Simmons' name on it. And they put out a corrected picture of Don Simmons with his name and his picture, but they didn't put out one of Norm Defilus because Defilus went back to the Eastern Hockey League and didn't play anymore with Boston. So there was no reason to put out one of him. And but there are some people that are adamant. And it was one of the guys that helped us with the book actually was really adamant that he had an original Defilus. And then he was in touch with someone that had ended up with a collection that had about 15 Defiluses in it. And he suddenly realized that to have that many Defiluses, he had sourced the collection of one of the guys that was printing the fakes. So he accepted that finally Defilus was not real.
Aubrey,
I'm shocked, Kevin, that there's unscrupulous people in the collecting industry. I just can't.
Yeah, we really are. Aubrey, can you give us just a general idea of the cost? Like, what's the crown jewel in terms of value? What's the average one go? Like, what would Gordie Howe cost you if you wanted to buy a Gordie Howe beehive?
Yeah. It's like the example I always use is, what does it cost to buy a car? And you'd say, well, what do you want? Do you want a Volkswagen or do you want a Mercedes-Benz? You know, it really depends on what people are looking for. And the Cy Wentworth with the Montreal Canadiens, there's one guy in Oshawa I know that has one for sale. He's asking $10,000. There's another one of Jerry Brown that he has. He's asking the same price. But he's also had those pictures for about 3 or 4 years, and nobody's bid. So the price on the rare pictures, and the rarest ones are the ones that come out 1940, 41, just as the war was started. Well, the war had started, but there were still pictures being issued. And there are 4 players that come up with the Brooklyn Americans that are pretty rare. So how much would they go for? They would go somewhere from about $250 up to $2,000 per picture, depending on who wants to pay for them. But if you wanted to get a Gordie Howe, you'd pick one up for $20. The really popular players, the Gordie Howes, the John Bellows, the Rocket Richards, they've gone up a wee bit in price from the $5 and $10. There's a lot of them around, but there are collectors that just want to have a beehive. So they'll say, I'm a Red Wings fan, I'm going to get a Gordie Howe. And that's put their price up a little bit. But if you wanted a Pete Goegan, you'd probably pick him up for, $3, $5. Alec DeVecchio, same thing. They're common, and they're not commanding a big price. The other thing is, this gray hair is reflective of people that collected beehives. And as we're getting older, there's not a lot of new collectors coming into the collection. They are collecting some older cards, but they tend to go back to the pre-war years and the cards of the 1910s, 1920s for high-price cards. I don't think we've seen a resurgence in interest in beehive yet. It may or may not come.
Well, that's what we're all hoping your book's going to do, Aubrey. So why don't you tell everybody before we let you go here how they can get your book? And
okay, I'll do 2 things. One is I'll show you what the book looks like, just so you have a sense of what it is. It is a 9x11 hardback, 300 pages, and I'm really bad at catching the camera.
Got it now.
It's a heavy sucker, and we've had some good feedback on it. We're pretty proud of it. It is available only online from us, the 2 authors, and our website is the beehivegoldenyears.com. And on that website, it tells you a little bit about the book. We sample 10 pages. We talk a little bit about what a few people have said in their reviews of the book. And there's a page where you can order it. The price is $52.50 for the book. And then depending on where you live, the shipping is $30 in Ontario, Quebec, and $35 in the rest of North America.
All right, Aubrey. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And hopefully there's a lot of people out there that want to learn more about beehives. I know it was a big part of my childhood. And thanks again, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks for having us on, guys.
I know you piqued my interest, Aubrey.
Good stuff. Thanks again, guys.
Yeah, have a good day. All right. We're both collectors, Kevin, so anything like that I think fascinates us. I know I've always kind of, because I collected them as a child, I've always had kind of a romanticism about the beehives. They're just kind of a big part of my childhood, and they were such a unique collectible. They're so different than hockey cards or any other kind of hockey collectible that, I still have a lot of the ones that I got when I was a kid, and I've bought a few of the older ones over the years. But now that I know there's 1,025, the thought of collecting all of them is probably not in my economic viable possibilities.
Well, it is really interesting. As you alluded to, I'm a collector of trading cards, and I was aware of beehives, but I certainly didn't know as much about them as I just learned. I would have never have guessed there were 1,025, nor did I realize that they just had kept the same photo from year to year. And I knew that the cost wasn't outrageous because I've seen them, except for the really rare ones, and those are always the ones that aren't the stars, because there were a lot of stars that were ordered, and as he said, not a lot of random players that get called up for 2 months at a time. So I don't know. I'm interested enough. I think I'm going to order the book and help a fellow writer and to see what that's all about.
No, I think the thing about them that was different until I think in recent years, the old days of trading cards, they printed the same amount, whether it was Mickey Mantle or the backup third baseman for the Washington Senators. There was the same number of cards printed for those guys. But now in the beehives, because you could order them, specifically, they printed a heck of a lot more Gordie Howes and Rocket Richards and Jean Beliveau.
Right.
Would have Jacques Laperriere or Bobby Baun or whoever. So that's what makes it's different than trading cards where the stars are worth more. In the beehives, the lesser known players tend to be the valuable ones because there's just not as many of them in circulation.
Yeah, but don't kid yourself. Topps double printed Mickey Mantle a few times in some of those older sets. Just because his popularity and so forth. But you're absolutely right, and I think that's kind of the uniqueness of collecting is that sometimes, and that's always a dilemma, because if you're collecting, it's hard for you to reach into the wallet to pay big dollars for a player that you wouldn't even know if he wasn't on that Beehive checklist or that Topps or OPG checklist, and where it's just hard that suddenly you hear that, oh boy, it's this guy is because he was short printed and wasn't available, or he was in the last series, and so they were only printing half as much, and all those kinds of things. But it's very, very interesting because Beehive is different, obviously, than trading cards, and I don't even actually know anyone collecting beehives, and I know a lot of collectors. Now, I'm sure there are some Canadians that maybe have just not mentioned it to me, but I was aware of them, but and it's fascinating that you would think there'd be more because they were so prevalent, as he pointed out, during the 50s and into the 60s.
Yeah, I think because it stopped so long ago, it stopped with the first expansion. So, generations of hockey fans have grown up without ever collecting a beehive. It's like with trading cards, the players on the cards change and the design of the card changes, but it's a tradition that is going still and is passed on from dads to kids, and the beehives just abruptly stopped, so it never got passed on. So I think that's like Aubrey said, it's guys like us that are probably collecting them because we remember them. But to someone in their 20s or even their 30s or 40s, the Beehive doesn't really mean that much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we had nothing like that in the United States. We had Post cereal that would put baseball cards on the back, and Jello, but we didn't have anything where you sent in and got something back. At least I don't remember anything from the 1960s and into the 70s.
Well, we should probably talk a little bit about current hockey while we're here. And I saw there's going around social media yesterday some pictures of Jake Virtanen from the Canucks out clubbing between on ice sessions with the group of players he's been working out with. And you look at what's happened in tennis now, where the men had a tournament, an exhibition tournament. They didn't follow any of the COVID regulations. They had spectators. They were hugging each other. They were going clubbing. They were playing basketball against each other and slamming into each other. They were hugging at the end of matches. They did everything wrong, and now one after another is getting sick. Whereas the women tennis players had a tournament last weekend, followed all the regulations as they were instructed, had no spectators, didn't touch each other, didn't get within 6 feet of each other, called their own lines, had just one umpire in the high chair calling the match and nobody else, and no ball people. All the balls were delivered via equipment. And so far, I mean, it's still early. It's not been a week yet, but none of them are sick. So, maybe that's proof that if you do it right, it can work.
Well, absolutely. I don't have any doubt that it'll work if they do it right. But, it's just so many players for so long a time. And, it's young, healthy people with a lot of money, and guys who, will be looking for a social life, and looking for things to do. So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And I think, as I've said continuously, I really, want to see this, but I'm worried about it. And, certainly, I think the NHL has probably anticipated there are going to be some positive tests. So it'll come down to how they react to it, how the teams then, figure out how to keep the infected players away, and so forth. Because we're not going to go through this whole thing without having some positive tests. I just don't see that, not when they're predicting in America that we may end up with 100,000 positive tests per day in the country. That's a lot. So, so I would assume Canada will have some percentage of that.
No, it's kind of interesting. I was doing some freelance work today, and I was looking up the last time the Coyotes and Predators played in the playoffs, which was in 2012. And that was the infamous incident where Nashville's Alexander Radulov and Kostitsyn, I should say. I think it was Andre who was on their team. I always get those two brothers mixed up. But they snuck out and stayed out all night and partied and came back to the hotel at 5 a.m. I got caught and were sat out for 2 games because of it. But it just makes you wonder. You see something like that in the middle of the Stanley Cup playoffs and they snuck out and stayed out all night. Are these guys really going to buy into this lockdown thing? I mean, you see enough people in society who still think aren't buying that this is as serious as people say it is. You got to think there's some people among several hundred NHL players that buy into that theory too. Everybody's not going to be on board with how dangerous this virus is. So are we going to see players sneaking out? And what series is is a team just going to light up with positive tests and basically end their dreams of winning the Stanley Cup?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the issue that could cause the greatest, problem is that, we have sequencing here on the march to the Stanley Cup. And, we couldn't have one series just canceled, because it would cause all sorts of consternation figuring out where do you go from there? Do you just pass that team that the winner would have to play into the next round? I guess that's what you'd have to do. But you can imagine the human outcry, if suddenly someone only had to win 3 rounds of the regular playoffs, to win a cup. Look at the outcry over what happened at the NHL draft lottery. So imagine if Toronto plays someone, both teams are disqualified, so the Boston Bruins end up a walkthrough on to move to the next round. So there's a lot of unknown here, simply because we've never been down this path before. We're playing it by ear. We're trying to decide it on the fly. I'm sure there are contingencies, but you really can't anticipate what will happen. I think the hope is if there are positives, it's limited to a couple of players on each team. They remove those players. Hope that no one else has caught it, and plug them in just like they're injuries, plug new players in, and move forward. And I think that's what they're hoping is going to happen. But I doubt, someone said, well, they're just hoping nobody will turn will test positive. I said, they're counting on players testing positive. Like it's just going to be how they react to that and what happens after they react to that.
Well, I think it's important that the league make it abundantly clear before any of this starts that if a team opts to go outside the bubble and do something stupid and 10 or 12 of them all test positive, and it's just going to be sorry about your luck. You knew the rules, you broke them, play your AHL team, and if you lose, so bad. So much for your luck, but you were told and you didn't follow the rules. So I think as long as the league makes that clear before they even drop a puck, then everybody knows this is how it's going to work, then no one's got a right to complain if it happens.
I think that will be settled. I think teams will expect that if one team ends up with multiple positive testing players, that's their bad luck. But I think the unknown is what happens if it's multiple on each team. What we don't know is how easily it will be spread if it does occur in competition. We certainly know it's possible because, we've seen, the mumps kind of make the rounds in the NHL a few seasons ago, and we've had the flu that's sort of run rampant. And, does it happen by the sharing of dressing rooms, or is it, when you're going in the corner and you hit each other and all sorts of bodily fluids come out of your mouth and nostrils and you're spreading it that way. So, there's a lot we don't know, and they're just going to have to kind of sort that out. But that would be the greatest fear for me, is if because I believe the players will be able to survive. They're young and they're healthy. But if multiple players on a playoff, on two playoff teams playing each other happen, what happens from there?
Well, what we know with absolute certainty is we're out of time yet again. And thanks for joining us today on the Thursday edition of the HockeyDebates.com podcast. We'll be back with you again on Tuesday with another special guest. I'm Bob Duff. He's Kevin Allen, and we'll see you on Tuesday.